This and all the free content of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you by our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. Become a patron today and help support the show while getting exclusive content made just for you. That's patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. And we thank you in advance.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, patrons, and welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. I am sitting in the parlor at the Shriver House, and our special guest today is Nancie Gudmestad the proprietor, I guess we would call you?
Founder and director.
Founder and director of the Shriver House Museum. We took a tour here, I guess it was last week already, right? Mm-hmm. And now, I've known about this place for over a decade. I lived here for 5 years, and I've been back for 2, and I can't believe it took me this long to come in here.
You know, I can't either.
It really is so cool. I'm not even joking. Like, I've been raving about it for the last week. And, you know, everybody, have you ever been to the Shriver House? Have you ever been to the Shriver House? And, oh, yeah. And I really can't believe it. Now, for those of you who've not been here, next time you come to Gettysburg, you absolutely have to come. It's, you know, like when you first go in, we're sitting in the parlor. It's the first room you'll see. And it looks like, you know, an old 19th century parlor room, right? But then as you go through, you see, you know, an old 19th century bedroom, and then you get to go up to the attic or the garret where the sharpshooters were. But I'll leave the surprise for you to come when you come down here, because it's when you come downstairs where that's where it really got me. That was the cool part. After you go upstairs, when you come downstairs, you wrote a book called The Shrivers Story: Eyewitnesses to the Battle of Gettysburg. George Shriver and Hetty Shriver, they were the parents, the heads of the household, whatever you would call them. Tell us a little bit about them before we get into. We're going to talk about the 9th chapter. I guess it's the last chapter. After it's the aftermath of the battle. Mm-hmm. But give us a little bit of a background as to who the Shrivers are.
Well, the Shrivers, they actually were one of the wealthiest families in town, although many people don't seem to realize that. George's father had a farm down on Emmitsburg Road. You turn onto Marsh Creek Road, go down about a mile or so, and there's an absolutely gorgeous stone farmhouse. That is the farm that George's grandfather built, the farmhouse that he built in 1790. George's great-grandfather emigrated from Germany. They originally went to Annapolis, Maryland, and then they came up here to this area right here. They had hundreds and hundreds of acres. At first, they had I think it was a 30-foot log cabin. And then eventually, in 1790, they built this house. When George was only 16 years old, his father passed away. George had 2 older brothers, but they were so much older that the father had already given them land, divided off property. So therefore, George inherited this great big piece of property at the age of 16. They took an inventory of the estate when his father died, and it included a couple hundred acres of corn and barley, that kind of thing, 2 still houses, and over 3,000 gallons in liquor. So the Shrivers, turns out they had been making liquor out there since the 1780s. Oh, wow. They'd been doing it all along.
And I'm sorry, where was the location of this farm?
You go down Emmitsburg Road, leaving Gettysburg down Emmitsburg Road. You come to Marsh Creek Road. You can only turn left. And you turn left, go down there at about a mile and a half, and it's right down there. And don't knock on the door.
No, okay, I won't. So how is it that they end up here in this house in town?
Well, when George was 18, he married a neighbor girl, Hetty Weichert. Hetty's father was Jacob Weichert of the Jacob Weichert Farm on Tawnytown Road. Mm-hmm. They immediately started a family living at that house. But then I guess George decided he really didn't want to be on the producing side of things. He wanted to be on the other side of the business. So he decided to open up a new business and something very unique. He opened up, they built this beautiful new home here, and the family lived upstairs. The business was downstairs. It was Shriver's Saloon and 10-Pin Alley. In the cellar is where George built a saloon, so he was still working with liquor, knew a little bit about it. And in the backyard, he had a 2-lane, fully enclosed, 14 by 65 foot, 10-pin bowling alley.
So They built this house. This was just an empty lot. I guess I'm assuming they purchased, or was it part of the family?
They purchased this lot. They sold off the farm to get the money to build this.
Okay. And then they build the house, and they decide they're going to run the business out of the house. What year did they build the house?
1860.
1860. Okay. And it was completed.
We're guessing in the newspaper at the time, it said in May that George Shriver was building a fine new home on Baltimore Hill. We're guessing they probably moved in before Christmas.
Okay.
Just before Christmas.
You mentioned Baltimore Hill, and it's referred to a lot in the book. We're on Baltimore Street as it's going up the hill. So Baltimore Hill, I guess, is why we're calling it Baltimore Hill. This
area right here was referred to as South Baltimore Hill. So I guess they called this whole thing Baltimore Hill.
Okay. So the war breaks out. Does George go and volunteer to fight in the beginning?
When it very first started, no, he didn't. He decided probably to stay home. He was going to get the business finished up and ready to go. And then once he finished, maybe he would go off and serve. But he got it all finished. They only moved in at Christmas, and the war started in April. Right. So they were barely into the house. By the end of August, he had the business downstairs all fixed up. So eventually he decided to go. So in the beginning of September, he mustered into Cole's cavalry.
So before he musters in, does the business even open ever, or is it just all set up but never? I have no proof, but my gut tells me is, I got everything ready to go. This war's still raging on. Let me go serve my country, and then when I come home, I'm going to be ready to open up my doors for business. It's a pretty confident plan there. I think so. So what does Hetty do while he's gone? Like everybody else, I'm sure she struggled. George was paid a little bit of money to be in the Army. They did inherit a lot of money when they sold off the property. Okay. However, they spent a lot of money to buy the lot, build the business. They furnished everything. We know that from their records. The 10-pin alley was all ready to go. So they spent an awful lot of money. So I'm sure she was frugal like everybody else. And there's no indication that she never tried to run the business, or they had someone? At that time period, a woman would never. You'd have to be a very bold woman. Yeah. And that was not typical. And she came from money too, so there were that would not be common. No males around that they could have. So it was just sitting there. Just sitting there. It's such a shame too, because you get to see the saloon, and it's like we were saying, it's the ultimate man cave. It's so cool down there. Now, what happened to the 10-pin alley? I mean, you said it was out in the backyard, but it was enclosed. It was separate from the house. It was not attached. It was behind the parlor here. Okay. And the man who owned the house around 1905 decided to get rid of the 10-pin alley. The sad thing is that he got rid of the 10-pin alley. Yeah. The good thing is he ended up adding 2 little additions on the back of the house here. In those 2 additions, that's where he put all the indoor plumbing, bathrooms, and kitchens. So the sad thing is we lost the bowling alley. The good thing is everything in the main portion of the house was untouched. So everything in here is original. Floorboards, doors, windows, locks, wood trim, everything is original. Oh, amazing. Okay. So before we get to the battle, let's kind of skip ahead in the future, just to a little bit of the future of the house. I know you get into some of this on the tour, so let's not give it all away. But give us an idea. You mentioned the man in 1905 gets rid of the 10-pin alley, puts all the plumbing in the addition on the back there. What later in the 20th century, who has it? And the house has only changed hands. I think we are the 6th owners of the house. Oh, okay. But around the 1940s, a family here in town bought the property, the house, and they had a son who was in World War II. He came back from England, where he drove a tank, and he brought his little war bride with him, and they lived in one of the additions here for just a couple of months or so till they set up their own home. But they then went off and got their own home. His parents, still lived in the house. Well, it turns out his parents passed away within just a few days of each other. Oh. And he was so distraught. Now, this is up in the 1960s. He was so distraught, he decided he was never going to come in this house again. So from about 1969 until when we bought this house, it sat here completely empty. Wow. Like no furniture, nothing? Nothing.
Now, to be honest, when that man added the 2 additions on the back of the house, he did turn it into a 2-family home. So the center hall and this half was one apartment, and everything on the other side was another apartment. Now, that had been occupied by a family that lived in there for many, many, many years. And that's another interesting story. But this half had never... The first time my husband and I walked into the house, we walked back into the kitchen. There was a newspaper, a Philadelphia Inquirer, still with a rubber band around it, something about, Pete Rose, or I don't know, something about the Phillies.
Oh, wow.
And it still had the rubber band. As soon as we touched it, it just fell apart.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So, okay. So now let's go back to the Civil War, to the battle. The battle occurs July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 1863. What do the Shriver... Who else besides Hetty is here? We didn't get to the kids.
They had 2 little girls. Sadie and Molly were 3 and 5 when they moved in. And then George goes off, and by the time the war comes around, they're 5 and 7 years old. So
she's got a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old girl. And the battle starts north and west of town. What do? Do they immediately leave? Do they stay here? What's...
Well, Hetty was only 27 years old, and you got to think about it. 27 years old, I've got 2 little girls, my husband is gone, and these guys are all coming into town who think that my husband is fighting their town somewhere down in the South. So she was absolutely petrified and decided that the best thing for her to do was to find safety at her parents' farm, because her parents' farm, the Jacob Weicker farm, is 3 miles away from here. And at one point they were setting up cannons in the street right out front here. So if they're setting up cannons here and the street was just filled with soldiers, where was you going to go? Where else would you want to be with your mom and dad?
Yeah, not here.
So they walked all the way out there.
So they walk all the way out there. And for those of you out there who are familiar with any of the civilian stories, you probably heard of Tilly Pierce, and Tilly Pierce goes with them, right?
Yes.
So she's 1 door up. Not today. It's 2 doors today, but back then it would have been 1 door.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was their next door neighbor.
There was an empty space. So when you come here today, they would go to your gift shop and check in over there and everything in a different house, which is built in the side yard. Is that how
of the
that
Pierce family?
Of the Pierce family
in about the 1870s or so.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, so it is still an old house. It's just
it just wasn't here during the Civil War.
So that was a thing. I think it was when Ken Rich was on the show many months ago. We were talking about the town and the layout, and he had mentioned that there were side yards. So it wasn't this unbroken wall of houses everywhere. Some places it was, I think, but here especially, there were these side yards that people could...
When we try to explain the neighborhood to people, I always say this is the perfect block, because the house on the corner, the Pierce house, was here. The next one was not. The Shrivers home was brand new. The next 2 houses were not here. Then there was the Garlic house, and then they had a side lot, a smaller one. But in a sense, that was your grocery store on those side lots. That's where you grew everything for the family, for the household. But eventually, when real grocery stores came along and they didn't need to do that anymore, or they didn't want to maintain it or pay the taxes, that people sold them off. And when they built homes in between, they built them because they weren't real wide and there were no setback rules like today. They just filled in the spaces in between them. A lot of people come here and they think these are row houses.
Yeah.
But if you stand across the street and look, you can see the brick is different on every house.
Yeah, and they're very long. That's what I love about these types of houses, is a lot of them go very far back. Like they're deceptively small. Like they're not really as small as they look from the outside.
Well, the lots were quite large.
Yeah.
The lot here was about, I think it was 248 feet, which is quite large.
Yeah.
But this was the end of the house back then, the end of the parlor.
This door.
Yeah, so
right
it wasn't that long. But now we have additions on the back. And in the museum shop, we have additions on the back of it. The houses on Breckenridge Street, many of them do not have any additions. And so you can see their lots are really, really deep. And that's the way these were initially.
Yeah. Okay. And so... So going south down Baltimore Street, you said the next 2 lots were vacant. They were open.
That was the Shrivers property. It was their side lot.
So they had
side
they basically would be 2 houses today, but 2 lots. Yeah. That makes more sense when you're trying to understand the Confederate sharpshooters in the attic. Because it was,
Absolutely.
today you look at it and you see other houses there and you go, well, who's shooting at what? And it's kind of, but it's not, it didn't look that way back then.
Not at all.
Okay. So they go down to Jacob Weichert's farm with Tilly Pierce. They're going to safety. They're going to get away from it all. Right. So they think. But what happens, you mentioned before they were setting up cannon up at the intersection there. What else did they do at the intersection? They
set up a barricade.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And on the very first day of the battle, Mrs. Garlick down the street, again, her husband was beyond he had gone up to check on his horses or something up there by Cemetery Hill.
Okay.
And when he went to come home, they're like, you can't cross the line anymore.
Because they were saying he was a spy?
Exactly.
Something like that? Yeah. Okay.
So here's Mrs. Garlick by herself with her children. And the first day of the fighting, she came up to the Shriver House and hid in the cellar here.
Right. Okay. I was gonna get to that. So now the Garlicks, they, how many kids does she have?
I think it was 3. I'm not
kids.
sure.
She's got 3 kids. A lot of people in town, all over town, Sour Broadhead's one of them. They're hiding in basements. Safe place to be, I would assume.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't the Garlicks hide in their basement?
I've been in that basement. Today it's much bigger, I think, than it was back then. But they said that it was only about 4 feet tall, and they had about a foot of water in it.
Yeah.
So this was a much better place to be.
So they came up here. Now the Shrivers weren't here, but they came and got in and went down in their cellar, which was dry.
Correct. And they had a beautiful view from the window downstairs of the street out front.
Because it's not like your typical basement window that's small. It's actually a pretty good sized window that you could see a pretty decent shot of what's going on in the street. Oh my God, I forgot to turn my ringer off. And what's going on in the street is that there's some fighting going on. They're seeing horses getting killed and men getting killed and, or wounded or whatever. So it's pretty interesting. But they don't stay there, though. Overnight.
The Garlicks?
The Garlicks.
Well, at the end of the first night, when things settled down because they didn't fight too much at nighttime, she went back home. Then the second day, she was afraid to bring her children outside again. So they did go down into the cellar, and she had her son...
Her cellar or the cellar?
Her cellar.
Her cellar.
The Garlick cellar. Her husband was a carpenter, so but of course he was gone. She had her son build like a little table, and they all sat on the table.
Oh, okay.
Down in the wet cellar. Yeah.
And it wasn't wet because of a pipe bursting because there was no plumbing. So why was it wet? Did they have rain that week or?
This area of Baltimore Street floods like crazy.
Really? Mm-hmm. To this day.
Well,
do you get flooding downstairs?
Well, when we were restoring the house, at one point we had 3 feet of water downstairs in the cellar. But we learned quickly that we had done some things. There were drainage holes, and we didn't realize they were drainage holes, and we clogged them up. Oh. So that didn't help. But then the second time we had about 2 feet, and then for quite a few years we'd get 6 inches, a foot, that kind of thing. But then the borough did something somewhere or another north of us, and that seems to have helped. So now we might get an inch of water, but nothing terrible.
Okay.
It's actually written into the deed that if we flood, we cannot block the flow of water coming from the north down the street into our cellar, because if we do, then the next house up has a flood.
Oh, interesting.
So it's actually written into the deed that you can't block the water.
Huh. That's interesting. Okay. All right. So the Garlicks, they go back over to their house. They come back over here during the second day's fighting.
Nope. They stayed home in their cellar.
They did?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
They only
you built
came
the
here
table.
one time.
Sorry.
It's all right.
See, I told
forgiven.
you. I messed up too. Okay, so they stay over there. Meanwhile, what's going on with Hetty and the kids down at the Jacob Weichert farm? Do they leave an account, or is it just Tilly who leaves an account?
It's Tilly's account.
Okay.
But they were all together.
Yeah.
So her account is the same as
So they're basically
Hetty's account.
helping with wounded soldiers. Mm-hmm. So the Jacob Weichert farm is right behind the Round Tops.
Between Big Round Top and Little Round Top, yeah.
So you would think that would be a pretty good stopping point for wounded to get some kind of shelter and help. And
if you read Tilly's book, so much happened out there. When they got there were already a lot of wounded. When they got there were hundreds and thousands, whatever, men marching up Tawnytown Road to come into town.
Yeah.
And Tilly writes about how they were giving them water and things like that. They weren't there very long, and a man came in and his eyes had been blown out. And these were, I mean, I always think of Sadie and Molly, 7 and 5 years old.
I know.
Yeah.
And I think of my nephew, he's 8. And I'm thinking he wouldn't be able to handle it. Seeing any of that
I wouldn't be able to handle it.
No, I know. It's people were of a different metal back in those days, you know. So, okay. So while the battle is over, they come back up here, and this is what the chapter that we're talking about is about: the aftermath. They get back to the house. What do they find?
Well, on the way back, Tilly describes everything was a mess. They had stopped on the way out to the farm at the Lydia Leister farm for a little bit because the roads were just such a mess, and the soldiers were yelling at Hetty to get off the roads. But eventually they got back. They got down to the farm. On the way back, they said that the roads were so full of mud, and they had to walk on the fields around them to be able to get back into town. They said they barely recognized the town with the destruction. All kinds of broken stuff and body parts and dead bodies, body parts and trees. It was just an absolute disaster. When Hetty got home here, she dropped Tilly off, and I guess it was Mr. Pierce probably that told her what happened inside this house while she was away. As you mentioned, during the fighting, everybody in town hid in their cellars. It was really was the safest place. But at one point, Mr. Pierce was kind of curious about what was going on outside during the fighting. So he went up into his garret or attic to watch all the fighting in the streets. When he could see out his side window, and again, that's that side yard that was a side yard, but now is the museum shop here. He could see across the yard and into the attic of the Shrivers home. He said the room was filled with Confederate sharpshooters. He watched the soldiers. They knocked through the brick walls to shoot their rifles through. There is a nice window there, but you wouldn't want to stand in a great big window. So they opened up a hole that was maybe 9-10 inches in diameter to stick their rifles through to shoot.
Okay.
He did say he saw at least one soldier get killed, and Mr. Rupp down the street talked about another soldier getting killed in the attic.
And did he referred to it as a porthole? The holes that they made in the brick, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Here, you have in your book a couple of the people's accounts as to what the conditions were like as they were walking back or whatever. This is from Tilly Pierce. She says, while passing along, the stench arising from the fields of carnage was most sickening. Dead horses, swollen to almost twice their natural size, lay in all directions. Stains of blood frequently met our gaze, and all kinds of army accoutrements covered the ground. Fences had disappeared, some buildings were gone, others ruined. The whole landscape had been changed, and I felt as though we were in a strange and blighted land.
What a great name for a book.
I know. Someone should snatch that up pretty soon. Here's another one. This is from, who is this from? Catherine Ziegler Clare. She says, the dying and dead were all around us, men and beasts. We could count as high as 20 dead horses lying side by side. Imagine, if you can, the stench of one dead animal lying in the hot July sun for days. Here they were by the hundreds. And then another one is McCreary. Is this, which McCreary is this? Do you remember which one it is?
I don't think, was it Albertus?
Albertus, yeah, it is Albertus, thank you. We saw many terrible sights. Dead soldiers were lying around thick dead horses and many cow skins and heads. The many strange and terrible sights made a strong and lasting impression on my mind. In one place, there were as many as 40 dead horses where a battery had been planked. The bodies were much swollen. So it was a mess. And you make a point here about sanitation. So there's a book, Gettysburg by the Numbers. Have you ever seen that book? It's a tiny little book. And to me, the most fascinating thing in there is about all the manure. Like the millions of pounds. But you kind of talk about that here too. And you have over 160,000 soldiers in the area, but there's also close to 70,000 horses and mules, and everybody has to do their business. And as you point out, there's not enough outhouses in the area to accommodate everyone. So everyone's going wherever they can. Every animal's going wherever it can. So you've got the just decay, just the smell of decay everywhere. And not only that, but the visuals, everything has changed. These poor people, a couple days ago, everything was normal, and now everything is just turned upside down. So now when they come home, Mrs. Shriver, she's told, like you said, by Mr. Pierce what's going on, but she comes into the house. A lot of her furniture is used in the barricade across the road, right?
Yes, we believe so. We don't have it in writing, but most as we know, if a house was occupied, the Confederates left those, for the most part, left those people alone.
Right.
If a house was empty, it was a whole different story.
Right.
So this house was empty. And when they were looking for things to build the barricade, many of the people in these surrounding houses stayed home. So this would have been ripe for picking.
Okay, yeah, because nobody's here. So what then does she do with everything? Does she just kind of crumble into a ball and give up? Or
I wish I knew, for sure.
But she doesn't, though, really, because...
Well, everybody in town was in the exact same boat.
Right.
So it was horrible, but at least you could commiserate with all your neighbors.
Yeah.
And I guess that she had to start cleaning things up.
Was this house used as any kind of a hospital or aid station or anything?
When we restored the house, we found those holes upstairs in the attic that the Confederates had knocked through there. And one of the very first days that we were working up in the attic, at the end of the day, we were working underneath the floorboards. And just out of curiosity, because we had found so many things inside the house, I thought, I wonder if there's anything under there. I stuck my head under, and the board was directly underneath one of those holes. And there were 6 Civil War bullets. 3 of them still had the gunpowder intact. So, of course, that was unbelievably exciting. And once we found those, we decided we really needed to look under all the floorboards, because good and bad, they didn't have any insulation so you could see. So we didn't have to pull up every floorboard. Mm-hmm. We'd pull up one, shine the lights both directions. And we did find Civil War medical supplies. They were neatly hidden underneath the attic floorboards.
Really?
They were not tossed, you could tell. The bottle was just laid perfectly, and a glass syringe, and not with a needle, but it was a syringe, was placed next to it perfectly. It was a little jar of ointment. So,
but that doesn't tell you one way or the other if this was used for the wounded.
It doesn't prove it. But again, this house was sitting here empty.
Yeah.
There's 20-some thousand wounded men. It's raining cats and dogs.
Yeah, it makes
You've got
sense.
this huge house. You've got a 65-foot 10-pin bowling alley that's 2 lanes wide. How many soldiers could you fit in there?
Yeah.
So I just think it's common sense that this house would have been filled with wounded.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, basically every building was.
Yeah.
And
I really wonder, what did Hetty do when she came upon that situation?
Yeah.
I often wonder, did she maybe go over to the Pierces? Did they take her in? Tilly doesn't write about anything like that. But again, Sadie and Molly were 7 and 5 years old.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I did read... I think it was at the Weichert farm when, on the 3rd day of the fighting, the Union soldiers told Mr. Weichert, this is going to be so bad, you really need to leave. So they left for the 3rd day. They came back. They left in the afternoon. They came back in the evening when things quieted down. And when they came back, I think it was the Weichert family, the soldiers gave them one room in the house. So it didn't matter if they had 2 people or 12 people. They had that room. The rest of it belonged for taking care of wounded soldiers. So maybe they gave Hetty one room to deal with because they had the cellar, the saloon, the kitchen, cellar kitchen, the bowling alley in the backyard, all the bedrooms upstairs. So maybe they just gave her one little corner to tuck those girls into.
What's with the red flag?
When a house was taking care of wounded, they would hang a red flag out front.
Okay.
I've been told, and it wasn't a pretty red flag. It was a piece of red cloth that sometimes was just nailed to the front door. My favorite, of course, somebody in town, I don't remember who it was, she hung red bloomers. So in 2013, for the 150th anniversary, it didn't happen at the Shriver House, but for that entire summer, we had red bloomers hanging up out front. But I've been told that if a soldier, some men wounded, lay wounded out there for a day or so after the fighting was over, if somebody finally got themselves together and came back in the town, if they saw a red flag, that would tell them that maybe they could get some help, medical help
some
there.
Kind of help. Yeah.
But I also was told that when immediately people started coming into town looking for their loved ones to either bring home to bury or bring home if they were wounded, and if they saw a red flag, that also would tell them that this might be a place they could find somebody.
So from what you were saying in the book about the red flag, it seemed to me that based on how long it was after the fighting, the red flag would mean something slightly different, or did I misread that? It seemed like you were saying During the fighting, it's, aid or whatever. After the fighting, it might be like a place to convalesce or a place to get certain surgery or whatever. Then later on, it might be for food and other types of comforts. Or was I just misunderstanding that? Were you just saying in general, a red flag was help?
Help.
Yeah.
However, I also read that if you had a red flag out front, when the Sanitary Commission and the other Christian Commission came into town and people brought in food and water and meat and things like that, if I walked uptown to get some meat for my boys that I was taking care of, that's cool. But if I walked uptown and I saw Mrs. So-and-so who lived across the street and she didn't have a red flag, she was not allowed to go get any of those supplies. So if I wanted to, I could have turned her in because she did not have a red flag hanging out front.
Interesting. Speaking of supplies, I think it was Albertus McCreary, but one of the young boys had said in his memoirs that if it weren't for the Sanitary Commission, they all probably would have starved to death here because there was just no food left in town. That's the way I understand it. We do a lot of school tours here, and I'd love to explain this stuff to kids. I mean, you bring 160,000 men to a town of 2,400. You talked about no toilets. I like to tell them, you tell that number to a kid, what's that mean? They don't know what 100 is. But I try to explain, do you ever watch the Super Bowl on TV? And they're like, yeah. I said, you know how crowded the stadium is that day? Yeah. I said, well, imagine, let's say, filling up that thing about 2 times, and there was not a toilet for anyone. God. Think about that. They have toilets at those places, and with all those people there, it's still a nightmare. Exactly. So imagine no toilets. Yeah. And plus the 70,000 horses. Yeah. And so the water, the wells, I mean, a lot of them were pumped dry. Some contaminated from all that. So where are they getting water? They can't just go to 7-Eleven and get a case of water like we can today. That's something I wondered about for years, and I always meant to ask that question up at the visitor center, and I finally remembered. And they did know at this time period that if you boiled water, it would be safe. But think about every drop that they had to touch, they would have to boil it. Yeah. And I understand, though, that they've started bringing in water, too, in big drums, 55-gallon, not drums, big barrels. Kegs, yeah. I remember reading something about Henry VIII once, and ale and wine were very prevalent in his court, but it wasn't because they were all lushes per se. It was because the water was so bad. They even say that with Ben Franklin in Philadelphia. Yeah. That's why they drank liquor. So whatever excuse we need, ladies and gentlemen, right? But that's got to be, I mean, it's really a disaster area. It is just, and these poor people now have to deal with it. They have to rebuild it. The army, for the most part, is gone. And the ones that are behind, they're not concerned about rebuilding the town. They're concerned about getting the wounded better. Exactly. And so it's up to the people to do it themselves. And I mean, you would imagine that all the furniture would be gone. So you'd have to either rebuild it or buy. I mean, did they have furniture stores back then, or did you just build it, or know a furniture maker? Or they had furniture makers. I think you could order furniture, but you'd have to go up to, say, Fond Stocks, and they would ship it in. I don't think it was being made here in town. But there were some furniture makers here in the area. In fact, Mr. Garlick was making furniture. Oh, okay. So things start to kind of settle down. We're getting into the fall, and then in November, just when everything's kind of like starting to get back to normal, another several tens of thousands of people show up to be here for the dedication of the Soldiers National Cemetery. And there's a man who comes along, and you may have heard of him. His name is Abraham Lincoln. He was the president, but he wasn't the big deal at the time. It was Edward Everett, and he was the big orator of the day. But anyway, do the Shrivers have any doings with this? Do they see it? Are they on vacation at the beach? What are they doing? They were in Hawaii. They were in Hawaii. Good for them. Again, I don't have anything in writing, but can you imagine? President Lincoln rode his horse right in front of this house. Yeah, we could have seen him. I can't imagine. That was such a big deal. So many people came to town. There was not enough places to put all these people. They say that a lot of the townspeople in town just opened up their homes and let these people come in and stay. I just find it so hard to believe that Hetty would not have been as enamored as everyone else in town to take those little girls up there to hear the president speak. And we could also assume that she probably let some people stay here, right? If everybody else was doing it.
I like to think she was nice and that she would.
We don't really know a lot about her, though, because...
Unfortunately.
Because she never left anything, or very little?
Not that we know of.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe doing some repair work somewhere else in the house that you haven't been to, you might discover her diary or something.
We didn't leave much unturned.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I was trying to give you hope.
But we actually told this story for
Did you climb up the chimney?
Pretty close.
Oh, okay.
We did stick things up there to see if there was anything that would fall down.
Did you remove the bricks to see if there's something in there, like behind a brick?
Yes.
Okay.
We did. Yes, we did.
Okay. Did you?
Yeah, and pulled the bricks off the hearth. In fact, the hearth in Hetty's kitchen over here, we did pick up. Actually, the hearth was gone, but when we picked up the floorboards to take a look underneath, oh my God, it was filled with my favorite little petrified mice. There were marbles, there were toys, there were lots of chicken bones and things like that.
Really?
So, yeah.
The marbles and toys, could you date like when they were? Were they Civil War era or 20th century or?
I really don't know.
Okay.
But
Did you save them?
Yeah.
I hope so. Are they in that case next door? Okay.
Yeah. But a few years after we did this, my husband and I were in California. My parents lived very close to the Reagan Library. Mm-hmm. And we went to the library, and everybody's so dignified. And I'm looking at it. When President Reagan was president, they took him back to the house where he was born and raised, and without saying a word to anyone, he went over to the fireplace in the kitchen, he picked up a brick, and he showed the toys he had hidden there when he was a young child. And I'm in the Reagan Library, oh my God, it's just like the fireplace at the Shriver House. And I was told that I had to keep it down.
Relax, lady. Curb your enthusiasm.
Exactly.
Okay. So the Shrivers didn't leave any account of the Gettysburg Address or Lincoln's visit, but Daniel Skelly did. And that's in your book here on page 77, so I'll just read that real quick to give people an idea. It says, I recall very vividly my impressions of Mr. Lincoln as I walked close to him. His face, lined and sad, bore traces of the tremendous worry the ordeal of war had brought to him. His expression was benign and kindly, and the strength of his character seemed to be evidenced in the pronounced features, a high forehead, a prominent nose, and a decided chin jutting below firmly set lips. His countenance seemed to reflect the tragedy of war. Turn the page. Excuse me, folks. Sorry. And the significance of his visit to Gettysburg on that day. So let's give you an idea of at least what Daniel Skelly thought he looked like and everything. Daniel Skelly's Jack Skelly's brother. Jack Skelly's Jenny Wade's boyfriend. And... well, let's not get into that. Let's not get into that. Some say she was coquettish, but...
I've heard those rumors.
Yeah, but I don't believe she was. I don't believe she was at all. She's, I think that's John Burns' fault.
Oh, my favorite character in all of Gettysburg.
Yeah, John?
Oh, my God. I love the guy.
Really?
Oh, my God.
What do you love about him?
He was such a curmudgeon.
Yeah, I know. And he looks like one, too.
One summer, we had a gentleman sit in front of the Shriver House, even though he was not even close to this house. And we got him in a rocking chair with all white clothes, and we wrapped up his foot, and we had the crutches there. And he was the dog catcher. So we didn't want to scare little kids, but as people would walk by, he would say, "Is that your dog?" And he would go on and on about because everybody hated him, or they were afraid of him. And then who does Lincoln want to meet?
John Burns.
John Burns.
I know.
I love it. One of my favorite lines on that book about John Burns, I believe he said that if Jenny Wade hadn't gone and gotten herself so famous or gotten herself killed, he'd have been a lot more famous.
Right. Yeah.
I love that line.
And I think that's why he started the coquettish rumors.
That's what they say.
He had to discredit her so people would start looking at him. He just seemed like a real jerk. I mean, I think I remember hearing a story that the broadheads didn't really like him either because he would yell across the street at oh, that's what it was. When he was going off to fight, I think Joseph Broadhead, he saw him out there, and he's, John Burns got his musket, and he's walking out the road there, and he turns around and sees Joe, and he's like, "Come on, Joe." And Joe's like, "No, I'm going to go inside." And
I'm good.
Yeah, he's like, "I'm just going to go take a nap. Got a headache." And then, because he was from England. And, yeah, Burns was, there's kids these days.
I love the guy.
He's a fascinating character. And you know what? It's just so Gettysburg. He is so Gettysburg. There's John Burnses today. I'm not naming people. I'm just saying, any small town has a John Burns.
Absolutely.
But we've got a lot of them. Whoops, I just dropped the book there. All right, so, and you mentioned John Burns being out front there. You do, what I like about what you do with the museum, it's not just a house tour. There's a show to it. You know, you do the things out, you do do you still do the reenactment? Did you do that last year? You didn't do it this year.
We didn't do it this year because of the virus,
Yeah.
but yes, we've been doing it for 21 years.
So you still do that every year. So you set up a barricade out. You can't close down traffic though, right?
We tried one year when the borough turned me down.
They turned you down. What a shock. It's amazing what they'll let people close down traffic for, though. Whatever, let's not get into that. But okay, so that's a cool thing to see. So you have reenactors basically on the sidewalk. You set up the barricade, right? And we have to imagine the rest.
A mini barricade, just in the parking lots spaces out front. But then when you get up into the garret, then we do have soldiers shooting their rifles out of the attic window.
Right. Yes.
And as I always say to people, you are guaranteed to see a soldier die on every tour because they love to die.
Of course, I gotta come to that next year.
And then down in the cellar. That's the only day of the year that the saloon is in operation. Okay. We take away the ropes, everybody can sit at the tables, and we serve root beer.
Nice.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fun. It's cool, and I just people have to come here. They really do.
You talked about this being a tour. In my heart, I don't think of this as a tour.
Okay,
I think you got it right when you said this is a story. This is storytelling.
I said that.
You should have.
Okay. No. I said it. If it's a good idea and you think I said it, I said it. Go ahead.
When you go to New York City to see a play, you sit in the audience and some action happens, and then they need to change scenes. So they make it real dark, and people come on the stage and they do all these different things. The lights come up, and now you're in a different place. Well, in the Shriver House, it's sort of similar, but instead of them changing everything behind you, you get to actually walk through this set. And I like this place to look alive. Sadie and Molly's bed is a mess. The kitchen's usually a mess because that's real life. Mm-hmm. And Hetty Shriver, it was in the middle of the day when she took off. So I'm sure her house wasn't perfect.
Right,
and
she didn't tidy up.
And when she came back, it was not perfect at all.
I don't know who's going to be coming in here, so let's just tidy up. Well, I got to tell you, when we came in, so what I like about it is, you start over in the gift shop in a completely different house. You come outside. It's like lemon sorbet. Walking outside, so before you come in here, it's a palate cleanser, right? And you come into this house, you come in through the old door, and the first room you see is the parlor that we're in here. And, you got the ropes and stuff, but that, you got to do that because you don't want people roaming around here because this is all antique stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this
it's
is like the real
stuff.
deal. Now, not original to the house because, right,
mm-hmm.
but
Time
original
period.
to the era.
Correct.
You got that awesome grandfather clock over there, which was from the 1700s. You said that was
1790.
1790. That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so I've been in old houses before that are set up for tours and things like that, for stories, and they seem a little too clinical to me. Like someone from a university said, well, this is how they used to set up the rooms. And so they're all the same. They're all set up the same way. Maybe it's different pieces of furniture, but it's basically all by the book. And it's, like I said, sterile. It doesn't have a feeling of somebody living here.
And too often they're furniture tours.
Yeah.
This is this style. It was made in this period of time. And we don't even talk about the furniture.
No.
If somebody has a question, we can answer it. But it isn't about the furniture. It's the story.
Well, and the only piece of furniture you mentioned was what is this called again?
Melodeon.
Does it work?
It does.
No way. And so it's like a little piano, or what is the...
They tell me it's closer to an accordion than an organ.
So you have to pump?
You pump. There are two bellows down there that you have to pump. I don't play it. It's not in terrific shape. But one year I decided for Christmas time, wouldn't it be nice to have melodeon music in the background? When you listen to that carnival music and it's really...
like a calliope.
Oh my God, it was horrible. I did it one year. I never did it again.
Yeah, some of those old instruments are kind of creepy sounding. Well, but so you got that. But to me, this room feels like someone does live here. It's not, you got the little pile of books over there on the table. It's not... Although they were wealthy, mm-hmm. and the parlor was just for show. So people rarely came into the parlor when they entertained. Where would they sit? Like, where would they just hang?
They could sit on the furniture here. Remember when you were little and your mother told you to straighten up the furniture?
Yeah.
In those days, they would take the furniture out when they entertained, and then at the end of the day, they would straighten up, which means they would put all the furniture up against the wall, chairs and things like that. So this was only for show.
Interesting. Okay.
They lived in the sitting room across the hall. That was more like a family room in our homes.
Front room over there?
Correct.
Front room. Okay. So where would they eat? In the kitchen?
I think that they ate in the sitting room. There was a table in there that they, during the day, Hetty could use it for writing letters, doing small chores. The girls could draw and play with their books there and that kind of thing. But I think that's probably where they served their dinner.
So it's like a multi-purpose room.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the bedrooms you mentioned, they're not perfect. It looks like they're a little messy. I think that's what do you have a background in museums or a museum, whatever they call it?
Just a love of old houses.
See, and I think that's the difference. Is you're doing it with the passion for it, and so it has a touch of someone who put thought into it. Not that people that run museums don't put thought into it, but let's be honest, they don't put thought into it. So
this is my big dollhouse, by the way.
Yeah, well, right. Okay, that's a good way to put it. It has, to me, and I don't know you well, but I'm guessing this says maybe more about Nancie than it does Hetty, right? Like this is kind of your touch or your take on maybe what she would have had. Like if I had this house, maybe this is what I would have done.
When this house was eventually sold, they took an inventory of the house. And that inventory was up at the Historical Society because it was with the deed. And that we were so very lucky to find that.
Yes.
Because it gave us an idea of the type of furniture that they had. There were 3 bedsteads, which means basically the bed frame listed in there. And that's why upstairs on our second floor, we only have 3 bedrooms made up. Because at this point, before George goes off to war, and we're talking about the 1860s here, that 3rd bedroom was not occupied. So we have turned that into an office for George because he had a desk that was listed in the inventory. And now we have a desk up there. So that really was and it listed in there bar china, bar tables. So it gave us a really nice window. Certainly not complete by any stretch, but it really gave us a good idea of the kind of things that they had. And this was upper class. So when we went out to find a sofa, we didn't find just a plain Jane. We went for something a little bit nicer for the time period.
And how long did it take for you to find all this furniture?
Well, I always say, I believe in my heart that this story was meant to be told. I really believe this. The very first day that we came into the house to take a look at it, it was beginning of January. It had been snowing, and that big house across the street was an antique store. And the gentleman who owned it, we came out and he was sweeping snow and things, and he came across, and this house sitting empty for 30 years, it was a disaster. I mean, it was the ugliest thing in Gettysburg.
Did it smell?
Pardon me?
Did it smell?
No, not really.
No? Okay. I just wondered what a house that hasn't been touched in 30 years would smell like. Okay, go ahead.
So he said, "Oh, this is great. Are you going to fix up this house?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you going to live here?" And I said, "No, not exactly." He said, "What are you going to do?" And I told him our idea, and he said, "Oh, my God." He was a museum curator in Old Bethpage, New York, where he maintained 26 houses from the 1860s, and now he was an antique dealer.
Wow.
So within 30 minutes, we shook hands, and he collected, I'm guessing, maybe 70% of what we have in here today in about 6 months. He tells me today he could never do this again. So I would go out antiquing at the time, to be honest, and I'd find something, oh, this would look so great in Hetty's room. And I'd bring it home and I'd show him, and he'd say, "No, take it and put it in your house because it's not the right time period." And I'd say, "Oh, no, but it's so pretty." He said, "Well, take it home. It's not going to work out."
Yeah.
So sometimes I have people, they'll point out a piece of furniture in here, and they're very kind and trying to help us out and say, "I don't like to say anything, but," and it's always that but. I don't believe that chair is really correct to the time period. And I always smile and say, "Thank you so much. I'll mention that to the director." Because my feeling is I trusted Glenn.
Yeah.
If he says it's right, it's right.
Right.
And yes, I've collected a lot of things since we opened. And Glenn pops around from time to time. And when he does, I'll show him what I got. And he's like, "Yeah, that's cool." Or, "No, take that home."
Yeah.
But most of the time, it's pretty cool.
So how long did it take you to get set up to open?
We started working on it the day after New Year's. And we opened up on the 4th of July.
In what year is this?
1996.
96.
And I swear to God, we worked 6 to 7 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day, because we are not Rockefellers and we needed to get our doors open.
And you also had Mulligan McDuffers?
We did.
At the same time?
At the same time, yep.
But that was running smoothly, so you could hire people to run it and you didn't have to be there all the time.
That's actually one of the reasons we did this. This is the third business that we've started in town, and third, like, of something that never existed before here in town.
What's the other one?
When we first moved here, we opened up the very first bed and breakfast in town. It was called the Old Appleford Inn down on Carlisle Street by the college.
Okay.
And we sold that, and we built McDuffers. And I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years into McDuffers, one day I was sitting in the office, staring out the window, looking at all these people playing golf, and my husband Dale says, "What's wrong?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "No, what's wrong?" I said, "You know what? I'm bored." We were absolutely petrified that we didn't know if that was going to work or not. McDuffers was going to work or not. So it was like, when you throw a party and you're afraid nobody's going to come. Well, that whole year that we were under construction at the golf course, because we built that ourselves too, we were like petrified. Is it going to work? Are people going to come? Well, they came.
Oh, yeah.
And they came in droves. So after the
I went on a date there once.
Ah.
Yeah. Didn't last long, but...
I don't know if you know, when we closed, I asked people to write on the walls of the ice cream parlor their memories. And as I was writing and telling people to do this kid came up to me and said, "You know what? When my mom and dad got married, this is where they came after their wedding, in their wedding clothes, bridegroom and dress."
Really?
And he smiled and he said, "And I was born 9 months later." I said, "Would you write that on the wall?" And he did. I thought that
well,
was
it wasn't
great.
that kind of a day, unfortunately. It was just
But
a
anyhow, we got
regular
bored,
day.
and my husband sort of said, "Well, I sort of am too." And it was when we were at our bed and breakfast, every morning people would sit around the breakfast table talking about General Lee, the peach orchard, and the wheat field. And the one thing when they would leave, my husband and I say, "Isn't that so sad? There were 2,400 people who lived here, and nobody ever comes back from their day of touring talking about any of those people except for Jenny Wade. And she's got an awesome story,
And all
but
she
she's
did
not
was
the
die.
only."
Yeah.
Like John Byrne said, yeah. But we just thought that was so sad. And we thought, one day we're going to do that. We're going to fix the house, make it look like that time period, and tell the stories of families from all around town and what they went through.
Right. So it's the Shriver House, and it's mostly their story.
It's their house,
but
so it's their story.
representing
Exactly.
all of the civilians and their experience.
We fully planned when we bought the house to tell the stories of all these different people. It was in the middle of restoring it that we started piecing together the story of this family. Once again, I believe their story was meant to be told. We couldn't have gotten a better story in town.
No, I know. And I don't think you could have done a better job. I mean, it's really a fantastic place. Honestly, I said this before. I don't know why it took me so long to come here. And frankly, I'll tell you, I think I know why. Because up until about 2 years ago, all I cared about were explosions and troop movements. I didn't care about civilians at all. But when I started doing this podcast, I realized if I'm going to tell the whole story, I have to start to learn about the civilians. And so I recently became more interested in them. The other day, one of our listeners was in town with a friend of his, and he got in touch with me, and they were up at Evergreen Cemetery, and they had one of the books. What's that book? Beyond the Gatehouse, I think. Okay. And I think that's the one they had. It has the map in the back of all the prominent civilian graves in the cemetery. But it only has like 32 of them, and they knew that there were more, and a lot of cool stories. So they wanted to go and add to it. So they're going around finding these people and then marking where they are. And so they asked me to go along with them, and I did. And as we're going around, we're seeing these names, and we're regaling each other with the stories we remember about these people and everything. I realized I'm like, these are like just regular old people from any other town, but because there was a battle here, we care about them. And they're like famous. It's like going to Jim Morrison's grave in some ways, like over in Paris. Like, it's weird. But it's also, I said to the guys, like this is the closest we'll ever get to going back in time and meeting these people, is standing over them as they're rotting away or rotted away. And it's a cool thing. And so to come here and see how they lived as opposed to see where they rest as they die, is a really cool experience. And honestly, I don't say this just because you're my guest on the show today and you've let me come in the house twice now in a week, but I really do think this is one of the treasures of Gettysburg, and I think people need to come here. Absolutely come here and check this place out.
I tell people all the time, if you come to Gettysburg and you spend days and days, if you want, out there on the battlefield learning about all the different troops and the movements and generals and decisions and that kind of thing, and then you drive away, you really have only heard half the story, because there's so much more to be told.
Yeah. No, it's great.
I say all the time that the battle was a nightmare for the people who lived in this town. The end of the battle was the beginning of hell for the people who lived in this town.
And the real fight, I think, was for those people to overcome and rebuild the town while rebuilding these broken bodies of these soldiers that are now among them in their homes and everything. And I mean, you know, it's they couldn't be wimps and have done that, you know. The wimps were already gone, probably.
Yeah, again, I always think that, you know, remember after 9/11, we all loved each other for about 2 weeks.
21 minutes.
We were polite. We would hold doors. We'd, you know, stop
cheer
at stop
for each
signs.
other.
And about 3 weeks later, it all went back to the way it used to be.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking these people were in that position for a long time.
Yeah.
So I'd have to just really, I believe that they must have helped to take care of each other.
I think so too, but you know, I mean, you bring up the 9/11 thing and how we turn on each other quickly. Now, I think that's because of media and 24-hour coverage, but they didn't have that back then. So maybe they lasted, you know, being all helpful for a month and a half or something like that. But I'm pretty sure, you know, the stress of that would probably get people squabbling again. I'd be interested to know. Oh, no, Jenny Wade was dead. Never mind. I was going to say, because I know before the battle, she was all, you know, a little mean to Mrs. Pierce about Sam. Remember the story about Sam?
My favorite line from Tilly's book.
Yeah.
When a young girl buys the book, I always say, you know what? This is not only good history, but it's great gossip. And they look at you and I say, yep. When Tilly was writing it, she said one day Sam Wade was standing across the street and Sam was an apprentice for Mr. Pierce. And,
what the quote is?
Yeah.
So the Confederates capture Sam because Mr. Pierce sends him off with the horse.
It's been so long since I said that because we've been close for so long.
It's okay. And Tilly, not Tilly, Jenny's standing observing this whole scene between Mrs. Pierce,
it's Tilly that writes this.
Tilly writes it, but Jenny is watching the story that Tilly's telling. Tilly's telling. So Tilly's telling the story of her mother standing on the front stoop yelling out to the Confederates who have Sam and a couple of other local boys and the horses in, you know, as prisoners. And she says, you don't want that boy. He's not our boy. You don't want him. And he just works for us, I think she says. And the Confederate says, no, you're right, I don't. You can take him. I just want the horses. And then there's Jenny across the street over there. And she says, you better, how does she say it now?
I remember.
You better hope nothing happens. Wait, God bless America. What the hell was it now? It was something to the effect of, you better hope nothing happens to Sam because I don't know what I'll do with you people or you folks or something like that. It was very Ricky Lake, like, you know, Jerry Springer, like kind of.
But when she was writing that, she said that Sam Wade was across the street, and she said, well, this is what she's writing in her book. You probably know about his big sister, but I am not going to put her name in my book.
Oh,
that's
quote.
the gossip I love.
Yeah. I know. Tilly's an interesting one. But your book here, The Shriver Story, Eyewitnesses to the Battle of Gettysburg, it's obviously available in your bookstore.
It is.
So when you come here to the museum, you can pick up a copy like I did. Or if you can't wait and you want to know the story before you come here, you can go on Amazon, I'm sure, and find it. You can also
our website, too.
Your website, and I'm going to put a link to it on our website on the book page, addressinggettysburg.com/books. And so there's plenty of places for you to get it, ladies and gentlemen. There's no excuse to not have it. And next time you come to Gettysburg, you absolutely have to come here. Nancie, thank you. What's the phone number if people want to call and information?
717-337-2800.
That's correct. That's what I wrote down.
Thank you.
And it's shriverhouse.org. What are your hours? Pretend it's a normal year.
A normal year?
Yeah.
10 to 5 every day, but 10 to 6 on Friday and Saturdays.
Okay. And what are your hours in
With the
end
virus,
times?
right now we're open 12 to 5 during the week, 10 to 5 on Saturday, 10 to 3 on Sunday.
Okay.
Hopefully that will change soon.
Great. Yeah, hopefully. All right. Well, thank you very much, Nancie. Yes. Oh, you want to talk about the blood?
Yeah.
Sure, we'll talk about the blood.
One of the highlights of the tour.
Okay, well, I didn't want to give it all away.
That's all right. That's all right.
All right, so tell us about the blood.
Upstairs in the garret, I mentioned earlier on that Mr. Pierce watched one of the soldiers get killed. A few years ago, I had a CSI police detective spray that area with that luminol type spray.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding you. There was blood from one end of the room to the other, side to side. You can't see it with your eyes, but boy, I was there that night, and it was unbelievable. And in fact, in one area, you could actually see a full palm print in the floor. And next to it, you could see this wiping motion where somebody was down on their hands and knees cleaning things up. It's pretty cool. You talked about not coming in here. Quite often I see men come in and they'll say something like, well, she did the battlefield with me for 2 days, so I figured I'd help her out and do this here. And I just kind of smile. And they're just being polite, but they really don't want to go because they know that we're just going to talk about cooking and cleaning.
And dresses.
And at the end of the tour, we're down in the saloon and the tour's over. We're like, come on, it's over now. We got to go. Come on with me. And he's asking questions and he's eating up the saloon. And it's just so much fun to watch.
It was a brilliant move making that the last stop in the tour.
Of course.
Because by that point, it's like a manliness snowball, because you start off, you're just looking at a house, and then you go upstairs and you see some bedding and dresses or whatever, and and then you go in the attic and it's like, oh, okay, some guys got shot up here.
Just left. Yeah,
I don't know, this is pretty cool. And then you come downstairs, and I won't tell you what you see when you come downstairs, but then eventually you end up down in the saloon, and then by the point, like I said, it's the ultimate man cave down there, and so by the time you get there, then the guys are like, you got to drag them away.
Exactly.
Yeah. It really, and maybe if I'm being honest, maybe I was thinking, well, what am I going to want to go see a house with dresses and mannequins with dresses on? Like, okay, whatever. But no, this is not like that at all.
Not at all.
Men and women alike can like this place. All right, so one more time, give us the phone number and the address. The website.
The phone number is 717-337-2800. We are located at the Shriver House is 309 Baltimore Street, but we actually start our tours next door, which is 307 Baltimore Street. But when you get here, you can't miss it because it says entrance over on the other side.
Nancie, thank you very much. This was great.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope our listeners will actually come here and tell you that they heard you on Addressing Gettysburg, so that you know. All right. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Okay. Good job.
Well done. Very well done.